Martin House, everyone. My name's Haley. I'll be one of your docents today giving you a tour. So right now I'm going to just talk about a brief history about the Martin family and how this house came to be. So the house was originally built in 1728 on the land that was originally bought in 1715 by John Martin. He originally built the house for his wife and 8 children, and they originally lived in this one room, which now is the parlor today. So over generations and generations, the house has been lived in by Martin families and extended to become the house of what it is today. And the Martin family lived here until around the 1930s when they gave the house to the Colonial Dame Society, and the last Martin that lived here was Susan Martin Tabor Allen. And she gave the house to them, and she also built the caretaker's cottage over there that now dames live in and take care of. And the Colonial Dame Society now run the whole museum and take care of everything. So now about the making of the house. The house originally had 63 acres, and now it's dwindled down to 51, and farmers rent out the land and grow different crops on the land all year round. And now on the making, so the foundation was originally stones dug out from their fields, and there's a myth that there could be spirit bottles in the foundation. And what spirit bottles are bottles that could capture unwanted bad spirits that could come through the cracks of the foundation into the house. And we do not know if there's spirit bottles in, but they were very popular back then. The house is still intact and everything's still intact, so we do not know if they're in there, but there could be. The siding of the house is made from bark on their trees on their property all over the place. The windows would be much smaller than they are right now. These are like a recreation of them, but they would be much smaller. And the panes were shipped from England to here, and individual panes, because it was much cheaper for them to get individual panes rather than the big glass. And there's 12/12 on the bottom and 8/8 on top, and there's 3 windows on top. And there used to be a side chimney, but now there is a center chimney since the house has been added on to it. And there are 5 panes of bullseye glass over the door as decoration. And yeah, so that is for the opening. Anyone have questions?
Can you just say again when it was originally built?
It was originally built in 1728.
Thank you.
Okay, I will bring you guys inside into the parlor so Kat can show you the parlor.
That's interesting. So,
Hi, I'm Kat Soper, and this is the parlor room. These are the 3 original corner beams of the house and the original overhead beam as well. You notice that the floorboards of this room are much larger than the wooden floors we typically have today. This is because it was much more in fashion to use the whole trunk of the tree like they would in ships, rather than to use the smaller pieces, but that eventually came into fashion and the large pieces came out of fashion. As you probably learned outside, the Martins at the beginning weren't the wealthiest, so this is actually attributes to why all their chairs look so different and have different styles. It's because it was much cheaper just to buy or make their own chair rather than to do a whole set. So they also have their own unique names as well. These 2 over here and that rocking chair in the corner are called Banister back chairs. These 2 behind me are called Windsor back. This one's a ladder back. This one's a leather back. And this one is a Portuguese bulb stretcher. I actually had to look up why this was called this because we had no idea. And it's because these 2 bulbs on the bottom are being stretched across, and the back is Portuguese in origin. And now with this, you also notice that there are carvings of nature that are found in these chairs as well. You can see horse hooves on the bottom of this chair right here.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
Back here you can see pumpkins with this one, and more pumpkins with this. And over here you can see acorns, and you can see mushrooms right here as well. You notice there are two rocking chairs in this room, and the thing is, they didn't start out this way. What most likely have happened is that they're just regular chairs that eventually broke over time. But instead of just making a whole new chair, they just repurposed it into a rocking chair so it could still be used and they didn't have to waste more wood on another chair. This right here is a 3-corner chair. This was designed for soldiers to sit comfortably with their swords on their sides so they wouldn't have to worry if there was an emergency getting their sword back on and keep taking it off and on. But over time, women who typically would wear large hoop skirts during this time found they could sit very comfortably in these chairs, so they actually became more used by women than men over time. On the table here, we have the original Martin family Bible. It has all the Martins' births, deaths, and marriages contained in it. And if you were a poor family during this time and you could only afford one book, you would purchase the Bible, because it not only would it have typically what you believed in, but it also recorded all your family history as well. This is a horn book. This is how young boys would learn their numbers, letters, and prayers. And they'd either probably learn it at home or at a local schoolhouse, depending how close it was, and depending how your family was about it. And the reason why it's called a horn book is that this piece holding the paper in place is not glass. It's actually a very thin piece of horn that just has been pounded so many times it's see-through now.
Wow.
That's where it gets its name from.
Wow.
Here we have a pair of spectacles. Only one pair be typically owned by a family, and because they're very expensive since they're made out of metal. But everyone in the family could use them because they're actually adjustable. And with this, everyone in the family could also use them because they didn't have their own unique prescription like glasses nowadays do. They would just typically be used to magnify, so they're just early reading glasses, basically. This is a pair of wick trimmers. This is how you would easily put out candles during this time, much safer than just blowing it out because there's a chance it could restart. But this, it trims the wick and all, so the part that was already burned wouldn't start again. And this right here, this is called a courting candle. Now, courting during this time, as you probably know, was basically just a formal way of saying dating. But with this candle, if a boy wished to court a girl, he would come over to her house. She would sit on one side of the table, he would sit at the other, and the girl's father would sit right in between them. Now, during this courtship, the boy would have to impress the father during the first date, kind of, and it would be determined when the boy would go home by the time the candle burnt down to this first ring here.
Oh, wow.
And this candle's And the thing is, this candle's actually adjustable, so if the father liked the boy and was impressed by him, he could actually turn it and move it up so he stayed longer. But if he didn't, he could move it down, so he'd have to go home earlier, which I imagine
something.
Yes, it was, which I imagine made it very awkward. Now, right here in front of the table, we have examples of clay pipes. Clay was a common material used because it was not the most expensive material. And with this, since it was made of clay, the end would get soggy over time after usage, so they would just snap it off and start a new piece, which is also why the size difference, as you can see. Smoking was such a natural and thing during this time that they actually, when guests would come, they'd offer a clay pipe to them as a sign of hospitality for them to smoke while they were here. And also, they had a pipe that was called the sick pipe, as we dub it, but it had a red dot at the end of it, so anyone with diseases but still wanted to smoke could use that one, but you could get another disease with it because you do not know whose mouth has been on that thing. Very gross.
Wow.
Over here behind you, we have the original fireplace of the one room. This fire, connects to the center chimney, which all the other fireplaces connect to as well. And with this fireplace, it actually, when the room was built, it actually expanded over here more to try to have as much heat going through the room as possible. And over time, it had just been boarded up since it wasn't the only room they were living in anymore. And with this was the family's only source of cooking and heating and lighting while they all lived in this one room for a while. It was also their source of heating their bath water as well. They would take water from the well outside there, put it in a metal basin, and put it in front of the fire for them for it to heat up and for them to use. Now, one thing is they would switch water between the people, so it got rather gross, and didn't take baths all the time either, because since they worked in the field all day, they needed that fresh water for other things. They also had their certain order for bathing as well. Be the father first, then the eldest son, who would become the man of the house if anything happened to the father during these times, the mother, and then all the other children, ending with in descending order, ending with the baby. Now from this is actually where we get the phrase, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, because from what I said, you realize the water be so dirty that you could not see the baby at all. Are there any other questions before moving to the next room?
How about these books?
Yeah, okay, what's in there?
This is just the cupboard, not much interest in there. And that's probably where most things would be stored. And the books, while I do not know most about them, but they are period accurate, I know that, at least.
Yeah. A lot of character.
And the portraits, are those?
These are Martins. While they once have lived in the original one room itself, they more span over to the 1800s and the late 1700s. But they would have lived in the house at one point. These are more third, fourth generation.
Okay.
But there is a legend with this chair that one of the families in this area here was friends with King Philip. Legend says he sat in this chair, warned them of the upcoming war, and said that this is the only chair that survived his house burning down afterward, while their entire family was able to escape.
So the original chair is in Boston?
Yes, in a museum right now. This is a replica we have.
Interesting.
So if there's no more questions, you can move on to this next room right here. This was the next room added on to the house from this original one.
So this is the full tester bedroom. This was the second addition to the Martin house. They call it a full tester bedroom because of the cloth that goes around the bed. Since there is no source of heat, like there's a fireplace out here, they had to have it to keep heat in. The mattress that is underneath this is made of hay, which causes a lot of bugs to be part of it. So they usually would hit the bed to get all the bugs out, which is where you get the saying, hit the sack. And then also another hit the sack, yeah. And then also another saying of don't let the bed bugs bite, because there's just all bugs all the time in it. Down here is a trundle. You would pull it out and they would put a hay mattress on top, usually for either the kids or some sort of guest to stay here. This is a bed wrench. They would use it to tighten the ropes. Some of the ropes would get loose after so much of sleeping on it, so they would tighten it up a little bit. And usually because of the smell from the hay, it would get a little smelly in here, so they would put herbs all over the room, and they would put it in the bed to keep the bugs out, but also to make it smell a little bit better, so it didn't smell crazy weird from all the hay from the barn.
Do you know what herbs they would use?
I'm not exactly sure on
Okay.
what herbs, but they would just use a variety of them and hang them around the room and in the bed. You'll see a lot of the bedrooms upstairs too, the two beds. Those beds are a lot bigger, and the reason for it is as they got more money, they got richer. They were able to afford more wood to create the beds to make them look fancier and bigger, whereas some of the, like this bed and the bed in there are a little bit lower because there wasn't as much wood they had. They didn't have enough money to make them.
Was there money or financial income from agriculture, from the farming?
Yeah,
around
there
here?
was a lot because of the farm and the size of the farm they had. They did make a decent amount to honestly put on like the add-on and whatnot, but of course they were just farmers, so a lot of the money wasn't crazy amounts, but they had enough to pull through. They had enough to add on.
51 acres, was that it?
Yes. Yeah.
All right, a lot to farm. Have
And
to have
is-
loud children.
And this chair, is there,
Oh, did they
because I
wanna
haven't
use them,
seen that
didn't
kind
they?
of a back.
I'm not exactly sure on this. I know a
Okay.
lot of the chairs, they're kind of just all
Yeah,
over.
isn't it
Right.
beautiful? I was
Yeah,
admiring.
really beautiful.
Yeah, the woman that had the house last, she did collect a lot of the things, so some of the chairs were added by her and put around just to make the house look furnished
Yeah,
as well.
yeah,
So yeah,
that's good.
if you guys want to, you can go into that.
So this is the half tester. As you can see, it only goes half. This cloth only goes halfway around the bed, and that's because there's a fireplace in this room. That room does not have a fireplace, so it needs more warmth. And the bed would actually get really cold still, and it is a hay mattress still. So they would have this bed warmer, and they would pop hot coals in it, and they would run it across the bed really quickly.
for the bed. They would want to do it really quickly because the bed could catch on fire and help was miles away. Many people lived far away from each other, so couldn't get help really quickly. Yeah, so this dresser, this is where they would keep their linens, and in their deerskin chest is where they would keep their clothing. It's very opposite of what it is today. Usually keep clothes in your dresser and linens and like baskets or chests like that. To make the linens, they would actually use flax. So flax is a type of plant, and what they would do was, this is a hatchel, and they would take the plant and thread it through this, and it would become like this kind of material, somewhat like this.
Yeah.
And they would use this wheel and string it on and make string. They would tie all together and make string like this. And they could dye it any different colors with like plants and bugs and different things.
That's how they dyed it?
Yeah, they
Like
dyed it like
bugs?
this. Yeah.
Our red color number 5, whatever the red, they still use beetles in that.
I did not know that, wow.
Yeah. And along with the flax wheel, this is called the clocked reel. And this was used to stretch out the string once it's in the string form, and it would also measure it. And this was used to turn it. And there used to be a part, it is not here, it is lost, but there used to be a part called a weasel, and it would pop when you turn it. So that's where the expression comes from, pop goes a weasel.
Oh,
So that's,
goodness.
yeah, there's often like different theories of like where the saying came from. There's like a German song about it. There's like a bunch of different things about it. So that's one explanation to that.
And
Saying,
what would make it pop?
once you turn the wheel, that would make it pop. Like you would measure it and stretch it. So once it was stretched enough, yeah.
Oh.
The last thing in this room are the paintings on the walls, the little paintings. And this is a painting of King George III and Queen Charlotte. And this really represents that down here, downstairs, they were still a part of the English colonies. They were still a part of England. While if you go upstairs, it's a whole different story. That was added after the American Revolution. So there's a different picture up there. Anyone?
And why do they call it a tester?
It's a tester because it's called a tester. Like this cloth is called a tester.
The cloth is
The
called a
cloth is
tester?
called a tester?
Yeah,
You mean-
Do we know why it's called a tester?
You mean, you don't say the bedroom, you say the tester.
Interesting.
So the pattern of the cloth or the cloth material or, we don't know.
We gotta
We don't-
Google that.
Yeah.
Okay,
I
okay.
can't pin you down here,
Okay.
Carol. Don't worry about it.
Too many questions, okay.
All the rest of the 1700s.
So if you guys want to go into the kitchen,
Right,
Sure.
that's right, that's right.
and
Welcome to the kitchen. So right here we have a trencher bowl. This bowl would be used, everybody would just eat out of this. They would have all their food in this. And a lot of times it was good for larger meats. So they would use these choppers, which came in different sizes and shapes, to cut up all their food for everybody to eat. Right here they have a
They still
skimmer.
use that at Subway, just so you know.
They have a skimmer, so this would be good to skim the fat off the top of meats. And then right here we have a scrubber, so when food was done, they were cleaning it, they could just scrub the inside of the bowl to get it clean. Right here we have some gourds, so they would grow these gourds on the farm. So they could hollow these out and clean them out using gravel and water and eventually get a hollowed out gourd. And this would be used as a water bottle. So if they were working in the farm for a long period of time, they could just have the water with them in the gourd. And then the smaller ones could be used for baby rattles. So in this bowl, we usually have our soap, which is made of lye, lye, ash, animal fat, and water. Just their own resources. Yeah, we don't have any in here yet, but when we toured the younger children, we usually have some fake soap in there. Right here we have Jacob cattle beans and pods, so you can peel these if you want. They would grow these in their farm and use them for cooking. Right here we have redware, so this would be made out of the clay that they found in their fields.
So pretty,
Yeah,
so pretty.
they used a lot of their own resources and everything to make things. And right here we have a grater. So this is very, very similar to the modern day like cheese grater that we have. So this is nutmeg. They could just use this and grind up little pieces for cooking. Now right here we have these 3 items. So this is brown sugar. Brown sugar was more commonly used than white sugar because nowadays we probably use white sugar a little bit more. But white sugar used to be very expensive. So if the mother had white sugar, she would lock it somewhere and keep the key around her neck so that the children couldn't get into it. Right here we have tea. So this would be tea imported from Britain, and it has the stamp on it to show that they would have paid the tax for it.
Yeah.
And then right here we have chocolate. So this chocolate was very bitter, more used for baking, not like the chocolate that we'll just eat today. Right here we have gunpowder tea. So gunpowder tea was tea that they would have made homemade, and it was called gunpowder tea because it was very, very bitter. So they would often take a piece of brown sugar and they would put it behind their tooth, and this is where we believe we get sweet tooth from. Sweeten the tea.
Wow.
Right here we have a small version of a butter churner. So this would be the job of a younger child to just churn the butter all day. They would have something to do and help the mother. Right here we have a mortar and pestle. So again, this is very similar to what people use today. Right in here we have some Jacob cattle beans, and they would just grind up. They could use this for basically whatever they need to grind up. Oh yeah, don't mind. That's just in there.
Ghost.
And then right here we have a candle mold. So they would make their own candles. They would put the wick in, and then they could pour the homemade wax, and eventually it would harden, and they could just pull it out.
Wow.
And then we'll move over to the mantle and the fireplace.
So right over here you have the Beehive Oven. Now they would only bake bread on Wednesdays and Saturdays because Sundays was counted as the Lord's day. So they would only use that on those days. Right here next to it is a toaster in which they would put the slices of bread. It is very similar to the modern day toaster, like the insides of it. So then they would put the pieces of bread and they would put it closer to the fire, so they would toast the bread. Right here is a Dutch oven. They would mainly use this to cook pies. So what they would do was they would put it over the fire so it would cook the bottom, but what they would also do is they would put the coals on top so it would cook the top of the pie. Right in front of it is a tin reflection oven. Now on both sides there are 2 holes, and you could use it as a rotisserie. So the heat would then reflect off of this part. That's why it's called a tin reflection oven, so because it reflects the heat from both sides. Above it right here is an iron hook. The iron hook was used so the ladies' skirts wouldn't get caught on fire, and then they could cook pots, pans, whatever they needed to hang. And these are called S-hooks. The longer ones were used for less time, while the shorter ones were used for more time because of the distance between that they had of the fire. Right here is a foot warmer that they would bring with them into church. During the winter, because they didn't have heat in the churches. So they would bring it with them with the hot coals inside, and the heat would radiate out of the holes that is on the top and the sides. Right here is the baby cradle. The second youngest child would rock the baby because the mother would usually be busy cooking or some other kind of work that she couldn't just always be paying attention to the baby. So the second child would just rock it.
Wow.
Up here you have a Betty lamp. These were like a cheaper way of light because they would put animal fat in hay. Because if they had to get up during the night to use the outhouse, or if they wanted to read, they could use these.
It's called a Betty?
A Betty lamp. It's not named after someone. It's actually from German because it was a better lamp.
Okay.
So, or it can also be called a grease lamp.
Yeah, there we go.
Right here is a mouse trap. It is not a real mouse.
Yeah.
It is very similar to a guillotine.
Oh.
So easier to just chop it. Above the mousetrap is a gunpowder horn. They would have the gunpowder stored in the horns when it was, mainly because if it was raining out, gunpowder wouldn't work if it was wet. So they would keep it in those horns by their side. And then above it is the Martin family musket with the original lock, stock, and barrel and the bayonet on the end. It was up high because only the oldest son and the father could reach it, so none of the little children could get to it. And that is the kitchen. Are there any questions?
When is that going from? Do you have any idea?
Well, it would have been John Martin's, so he built the house in
The
1728.
original.
It's the original.
The original.
Yes.
The original to the house.
It's one of the big originals in this house. A lot of things are like passed on from different families and
Right.
collected here.
Most of
That
us-
was from the Martin family.
Wow.
Things are a lot easier now in the kitchen, aren't they?
Yeah, that's a few.
I did.
Okay, we have a very good technology
Hi,
person.
hi,
You checked it on our phone. The information says, let's see, the edges may overhang, in some cases are decorated. The word tester derived from the late Latin testa, T-E-S-T-A,
That's what I thought.
meaning head. And it came into use in the Middle Ages, originally referring only to the vertical headpiece. So we didn't know.
Oh, all right. Thank you for that information.
The Loom Room was the last piece to be added, and that was in the early 1800s. We figured maybe around 1836. So, and then it would have made the house complete the way it is now.
And
Um,
who occupied the house? I mean,
The Martins occupied the house until the 1930s.
really?
Susan Martin Allian was the last Martin to actually use the house. She lived in New York. She was a New York dame. And she came and, either used the caretaker's cottage or perhaps stayed here because there is some electricity and a bathroom. And she donated in 1930. She was, I guess, the last one that owned the house. She donated in the 1930s to the Massachusetts Colonial Dames.
Wow.
So they have taken care of it ever since.
So it's really just been one family since the
One
beginning.
family until the 1930s,
That's
yes.
incredible.
So is there anybody living that's from the family that's around here?
We have had many people visit us on Sundays who are Martins. We had someone last Sunday who came in with his whole genealogy. He had been contacted by his 8th cousin who lives in Oregon, who said to him, "Do you know that the original Martin house is in Swansea?" The man was living in Bristol and didn't know.
Oh, wow.
Didn't know. So he came to visit and he gave us the genealogy, which I sent up to Boston for them to look at. But we've had many. We've had one called Ace Martin, who lives in Rehoboth, who brings his little girl Reagan, and he said that she is the last child, Martin child, in line. So we've had many, many people. We've had people who, one woman came from Pittsburgh. Her grandmother used to live in a caretaker's house. And this woman used to play as a child in Martin House. This was actually her playhouse. So we've had some really marvelous people come in that have this wonderful connection. Yeah.
That's nice, refreshing.
It is, and so we're hoping, we had talked about possibly, maybe a Martin family reunion or something like that. Because I know the Luthers in town, the Luthers have a reunion every couple of years.
Who did the restoration work? This is not 400-year-old plaster.
No, it is not. They just had this done last year.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure the company, but it is a restoration company. It's an authentic restoration. It may have been the same company. They did the windows a few years ago, the doors, and the bed, the full tester bed. I think it was the dames actually took the bed apart and somebody worked at it to get it back into good condition, and they put it back together again. You'll see the ceilings upstairs were just done this summer. I think the Empire bedroom, I'm not sure about the other one. But they've done, every year they try to do something to make sure that it's kept up. The roof, the shingles on the roof are brand new. They were done this summer because they were in bad shape. They do a lot of work with keeping the trees pruned. They've had to take a couple down. We had an incident, Hurricane Irene. One of the men was coming by to check the house, and he noticed that a branch had fallen from one of the trees and it had nicked the gutter on the front of the house. And I think one of the panes of a window was cracked. But what he discovered was that it had snapped before it fell if it had not snapped, it would have gone right into the parlor. So someone was looking over
Yeah.
the house. But
The
we've had,
spirits.
the spirits, they
Yeah.
didn't get into the
Yeah.
spirit box.
That's right.
But, yeah, we've had many Martins and fabulous visitors. We've had a lot of people who said, you know, I drove by for years and saw the sign and hadn't come in, and, we wanted to come in and make sure we saw it. So we've had wonderful visitors.
Where were the Martins immigrants from?
Pardon?
Where were the Martins immigrants from?
They were from England.
They were from
Yeah, they would come from England, yeah. So, actually, yeah, I'm trying to think, there is a history, and I can't think of what it is, but it's, matter of fact, it was in that genealogy I just sent out to Boston. So, hopefully maybe we can put a book together. I mean, I'd love to see all of this documentation.
Well, there's 10 steps, and each step represents 10 years, because downstairs was the 1700s, and now we're in the 1800s. It's like 100 years later. That's why there's a picture of George Washington, because now there's a president, and before it was still, they were still under the British rule of the king and queen. So this is called a water bucket, or a fire bucket, same thing. They would put water in it, and if there was a fire, they would have to rush to a neighbor's house on horseback with the bucket filled with water, and they would throw the water on the fire. Not very efficient, but
No.
if they didn't go to the fire, their name would be put on a list, and if their house ever caught on fire, they wouldn't have any help. And that's why that house and the barns were always so far apart from each other, is so that if one caught on fire, they could probably live and survive in the other one until they could fix the house or rebuild. This is called, well, obviously it's a lantern. As you can see up here, this is a family crest. It's not the Martin family crest, but during this time they would have the crest poked outwards so that if it was windy, the wind wouldn't go in and blow out the candle. And it would also shine like the crest pattern, so as they were walking, they would most likely know who the family was if they couldn't see them. These are called band boxes, and in the winter, they would store their summer clothes in the boxes, and in the summer, they would store their winter clothes in the boxes.
You know what? I remember my grandmother saying that such and such a person looked like they just stepped out of a bandbox.
Oh,
Yeah, it's a band box.
wow.
What's it called?
A band box.
Bandbox.
So this is the Empire bedroom, and the curtains on the bed and the bed pattern itself match, and that's because it's called India print, and it was cheaper for them to buy it in bulk, or it could be given as a wedding gift. On the bedpost, there's different elements of nature. For example, the pineapples, which are a symbol of hospitality. Over here, this is a Benjamin Franklin fireplace, and it's different from the traditional fireplaces that were downstairs because it circulates the heat throughout the room a lot better. So in the winter, the room stood a lot warmer than the ones downstairs. And then these porcelains.
Can you explain why? Because it was metal and it
Well,
radiated?
probably
or?
because it was cast iron, so
Okay.
that probably heated up. And then the way that it's like fanned out.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
It extends more.
Yeah, okay.
And then for the, well, those are ceramics, but the porcelain statues were given as wedding gifts, and there was usually one for each of the 4 seasons. Does anyone have any idea what season this might be? Yeah, we're pretty sure it's fall because of the different, like the golden colored leaves.
When the women worked in the fields, they would become tan, so they would put wax on their face to have a paler complexion. So when they sat next to the fire, they would use a screen to protect the wax from actually melting off their face. Yeah.
So
Say
when
that
they were
again.
outside, they had the wax on their
No,
face?
when they were outside, they became tan, and they
Yeah.
wanted to have a paler complexion so that they didn't have to work, and that they were like more wealthy. So they would put wax on their face, so
Oh,
they would.
like it was like paint, but it
Yeah.
wasn't. Oh, got
Yeah, it was like
okay.
makeup. Over here is a wig. It's made out of horsehair. Their hair had become very dirty because they didn't bathe very often. So they would use the wig to hide their actual hair, and they would keep it in place with the turtle shell comb.
Turtle shell.
Yeah. And these are pins and pin cushions, and they would get the pins as a wedding gift because they were really expensive back then. We can go right over there. So this is a letter box.
they would use it to write and store letters in here, and obviously they would use the quill. And on the side, there's a secret compartment. So like if they had love letters or letters they didn't want anyone else to see, they would just keep it in here. And
It's not very secret.
yeah, I know. And then you can go right into this room. So this is the parlor bedroom, and as you can see, the mattress was a lot higher than the ones that you saw downstairs. And that's because during this time, the Martin family was a lot more wealthy. And if the mattresses were higher, it was typically a symbol that the family was more wealthy. The bed, curtains, and the chair are all the same fabric and pattern, and it's called India print. That's because it was cheaper for them to buy it in bulk, or it could have been given as a dowry, which is a wedding gift. Over here, this is a closet, and typically closets were very rare for them to have, and this is where they would store any china or valuables that they had, instead of clothes like we do now. And that way, if anyone were to break in, they most likely would not really think to check in here for that. And since this one's near the bed, they'd most likely wake up if anyone were to break in during the night. Over here is a sampler. They use it to practice writing the alphabet, numbers, and prayers. Can anyone notice any mistakes in here?
Everybody put your readers on.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Well, I mean, the grammar's a little weird.
Grammar, right, but I don't see.
Yeah, heavenly is spelled wrong. It's missing an E.
Oh, yeah, it is.
Oh, you're right.
And so
Every.
is every.
Every,
Yeah.
you're right.
And then also they went right from 8 to 10, like they didn't have 9.
Well, maybe, and why would be that?
Because they thought that only God was perfect and they could make mistakes. So they like showed that with this.
Oh,
You mean they
interesting.
intentional?
Interesting. Yeah, very interesting. I did not know that. Wow.
Over here are pill bottles. And after they finished using them, they would paint German designs on them and use them as decoration. And this is a wingback chair, so when the women were sitting next to the fire, they would sit in this chair because the wings on the side prevented their makeup from melting off.
Well,
Again, the
yeah,
makeup.
the makeup
Okay.
thing, huh?
So that's it for this room. Any questions?
What was the wax made out of?
It was like animal fat and lye.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that in
nice.
ancient Egypt, they would put
Yeah.
that
Yeah,
on their
that wasn't an everyday thing, right?
No.
Only when the
They had company
the
or
three
something.
Yeah.
times
Yeah.
a year when they did something.
Just seemed melting down your face.
And the preference for German designs on the bottles is
Yeah,
just
that's
by
interesting.
accident?
I don't really.
Because I
English.
thought they were an English family.
Yeah.
It might have been
I'm not
style.
sure. No, we weren't.
Okay.
It could have been
That's
in
fine.
vogue.
Maybe,
Yeah.
yeah, okay.
Nice, very nice. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
well.
Yeah.
Run.
So welcome to the Loom Room. This was the last part of the house that was added on, and it was in the early 1800s, around 1830s. And since this time, the shape of the house hasn't been altered. So, for using the Loom Room, they would first take their sheep in the farm and shear them, and they would bring the wool and use these carders to clean and to untangle them. So the way that they would work is they would put the piece of wool in and they could just brush it out, and eventually they could roll it into a piece like this. And it would end up looking something similar to this, this piece. You can touch it too if you would like.
Oh, yes.
But they would,
Oh, nice, nice.
after they rolled it, they could take it and they would put it onto this walking wheel. So we have a little piece, but the way that this works is that you would spin the wheel clockwise, and it would eventually just turn it into yarn. So let's see if it'll work a little bit for us. So as you can see, like this piece is starting to get tighter, and you can eventually make the yarn. You could also make linen and use flax on this, but we have our wool. And then that could be put onto the loom.
So the loom was used to make larger articles of any kind of cloth, fabric, objects. And the way it works is underneath me, there's 2 treadles that I can control these with. So when I take, I don't actually, that's not. So when I take these up and down, I switch these two sets of thread, and when I do, I create the shed underneath. And I push this called the beater back, and I take your shuttle, which has a bobbin of yarn in it, and you send it across through the shed, and you bring it back out on this side if it doesn't tangle. And I take the beater and I bring it down twice, as hard as I can, to push the thread as far back as I can into this. And then I switch the treadles again to give you a little space.
So it alternates.
Uh-huh.
Yep. And that creates it would work, there we go. And that creates another space. But now when those switch, you can see that it interlocks the thread right into place, so it can't come out if I pull on it. And then you just kept doing that, and that would be anyone in the house's job. It's something that, in theory, it's simple to work, but it takes practice to get comfortable with it. So anyone could learn to do it in the house. Sometimes the younger people would do it, sometimes the mother would do it. And if you were inexperienced at throwing the bobbin, you would have younger siblings or younger children stand on either side. So if I were to throw it and I would miss and it would come out, my younger sibling could catch it so it wouldn't hit the ground. And then in order to keep this taut so that there was no sag, you tighten it around this by turning this wheel. And then in order to get new thread going, you lift that beam and turn that barrel.
It's a little bit hard.
Don't turn it.
Yeah, I'm not going to turn
It's
it.
tiny
But
tight.
you would turn this part.
At really challengingly hard.
Oh,
And-
to pull this way.
Yes.
Yep.
And then you would have, don't worry about it, just, it's phones, nobody cares. Nobody cares about your phones. So this frame is an original frame, but it might not necessarily be an original Martin House frame. I don't know the entire history on this frame, but it's been modified for our safety. As you can see, there's some bolts in it and a couple of newer pieces of technology so that as we continue to pass on the knowledge of this, there's no risk of us getting hurt or anyone else getting hurt. That way there is no reason that we would not be able to use it anymore. This way we can just continue showing people what it was like and educating everyone on it.
And this could have been the original Martin family loom. It's definitely an original loom.
Yes.
It's very old. But we do know that the walking wheel is probably definitely the Martins.
Oh.
So, just a little bit of education on the effects of the time. We have huge temperature swings in New England. We go from really hot to really cold, and wood contracts and shrinks. So this wheel has shrunken just a little bit and lost the tension. So we had to modify it. I don't know where the little piece of wood is, but right there.
Yeah.
Just to keep it tight enough to spin this part, which we had some issues with before. Spin this and keep it going.
We've got it working now, so everyone gets to still see what it was like back then.
Oh, that's good.
That's the loom room.
Thank you, ladies, did a nice job. Thank you.
So
And over there is a yoke. And when the elementary school kids come for their tours during the fall time, that's like our really big thing. We put the yoke on their backs and then we push down on them to make it feel like actual weight.
That's cute.
Yeah, that is cute. And then they would put milk or things like that on the bottom, and they would carry it from the barn where the cows would stay to the house. If you come over here,
Oh, yeah.
this is a really big yoke, and this would be for like oxen or things like that. That would be carry like large buckets of water or milk. And then this is a training yoke, which would be for the baby oxen. And so you put this around their neck, and then it would train them to be more fit and more strong, so they could use the bigger yoke. Yeah. And then over here are 3 different instruments.
I know, I can't.
Oh, don't worry about it.
I feel like I'm stepping in your
So you
space.
probably know what 2 of these are. What's this for? Pitchfork, bale hay, or be in a mob, whatever you want. And then that's a scythe, and that would be to cut corn, or be the Grim Reaper. And the Grim Reaper actually gets that because there was a lot of accidents that happened in the fields because children would play in the fields, maybe the father was out there cutting.
Oh, yeah.
You can't see the children. Yeah.
Oh.
So the rule was, if you weren't taller than the grass, you probably shouldn't go out in the cornfields when somebody was cutting all of the corn down.
Wow.
Because maybe an accident would happen. And can any of you guess what this is?
Rake.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's a clam rake.
A clam rake.
Clam.
Oh.
Yeah.
got it, Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So there's actually a pond, we believe, that was out there somewhere. And I forgot to say this before, but that's an ice chopper. And they would take the ice and they would cut it.
Which is the ice chopper?
Which one is the ice chopper?
This one right here,
That's the ice chopper
that's the ice chopper.
with the
And they
long
would cut it.
thingy there.
Yeah,
That evil looking.
Yeah.
Oh my
And they would
God.
cut
As
it.
opposed to the other evil looking things.
Everything looks evil.
Yeah.
And then they would cut the ice, and
Uh-huh.
then they would actually use it. And right where Brianna is sitting, right behind her is an ice box, and there would be ice that would be stored in there.
You mean the ice box in the ground?
Yeah, it goes underground.
Underground,
And they would
yeah.
put their meat in there during the summer
Yeah.
to keep it nice and cool,
Yeah.
so that it didn't go bad. So like if they killed a cow, it could stay fresh for a month or so.
Good. Okay.
And then this would be the clam rake, and they would actually go flip this upside down, pull it apart, push it back together, and pull it up. But this thing is so rusty that I can't even do it. But they would pull it apart and then bring it back up, and the clams in the dirt would come up, and then this would actually be to sift through the dirt, and then the clams would be there. Yeah, a lot of hard work, and it's much easier now. Everything here is much easier to do now with all of the technological advancements that are happening in agriculture and things like that.
Thank you very much. Very good.